But in the mob in the 1970s, they didn't care. Bruno Indelicato was called Whack Whack. And he was charged and convicted of Carmine Galante's murder and the murder of the other two Bonanno crime family guys who were at that table with him at that day at that restaurant. Each of those three murders was treated as a constituent element of Bruno Indelicato's ultimate conviction on racketeering charges. What is racketeering, right? It means basically not just crime, but crime as part of an organized enterprise. That's why they used it against the mob so much, right? Considerably tougher penalties for crimes that get prosecuted under that racketeering umbrella. Here's the thing, though. Mr. Whack Whack, Bruno Indelicato, had a really good lawyer at the time who eventually argued in his case, as it made its way through the court system, that although this looked at the surface like an incredibly black and white case, I mean, literally, this is Whack Whack puts on a ski mask and shoots the cigar at an Italian restaurant in Bushwick, right? Like, it doesn't sort of get more black and white than that in terms of mob hits. But his lawyer was good enough to complicate the circumstances considered by the law to a considerable and lasting extent. His lawyer used that crazy case to force an entire 12-judge panel of the Federal Appeals Court in New York, the Second Circuit, to reckon for the first time in that case, in Bruno's case, with the real specific legal definition of racketeering. Racketeering had been used in the law for quite some time, but it was that case that led to the first legally tested, specific, rigorous definition of racketeering under U.S. federal law. That lawyer for Bruno Indelicato, Mr. Whack Whack, the lawyer for him who turned that gangland bloodbath case into a legal landmark that still matters today, that changed forever the way racketeering is used in U.S. federal law, he's still around. That lawyer, as a prosecutor and then as a defense attorney, litigated dozens of organized crime cases, including some of the highest profile cases in the worst of the mafia wars in New York City. As a prosecutor, he ran both the appellate unit and the criminal unit at SDNY in two different stints in that storied U.S. Attorney's Office. He ran both of those divisions at SDNY. With all of that experience as a prosecutor, he's now one of the highest profile, big deal, white-collar defense lawyers at one of the fanciest law firms in New York, a firm called Paul Weiss. And that lawyer just got a new job. The New York Times reporting tonight that earlier this month, he was sworn in as a special assistant DA, which seems like an unlikely title for a guy with that kind of pedigree and that kind of history, but that's what he is now. He's sworn in as a special assistant DA at the state prosecutor's office in Manhattan. He has taken leave from his very fancy private firm and instead taken a temporary gig to assist prosecutors in that office. He has upended his whole life in private practice, put everything else on hold. He's been sworn in with this special status. Also, he can work with state prosecutors in New York on precisely one case. And that one case is the investigation underway in that office of the Trump Organization. This is the ongoing criminal investigation of former President Trump and his business. It reportedly includes allegations of tax fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud. It started with an investigation related to the hush money campaign finance felonies for which Michael Cohen went to prison, and which led prosecutors to describe President Trump as Individual One, an unindicted co-conspirator. That investigation by state prosecutors has since reportedly expanded to include wider allegations about basically the president and his company allegedly keeping two sets of books for various Trump properties, including Trump Tower. So they could, according to investigators, potentially defraud tax authorities and defraud banks and defraud insurance companies by using two different sets of books with two different sets of valuations for all of the Trump major properties. The Times reporting tonight that the case has recently generated more than a dozen new subpoenas. This is also the case that produced subpoenas to financial firms for personal and business records and tax records related to the former president. Lower courts have ruled that those subpoenas are valid and should be enforced, and these state prosecutors should get access to those documents. Both CNN and the New York Times are reporting in depth tonight on the mystery surrounding what's happening with those subpoenas and what's happening with that case in the United States Supreme Court right now. This New York State investigation of President Trump is one of 2 live criminal investigations that he's facing that we know about. One of them is the criminal investigation that has just been opened into his conduct in Georgia in terms of him pressuring Georgia state officials to basically corrupt the election outcome in that state. The other is this New York investigation into potential financial crimes, tax fraud, bank fraud, insurance fraud. Well, those New York prosecutors need the president's financial records in order to press this case. And they say they need his tax records in order to press this case. They have issued subpoenas for those records. Lower courts have said they should get them. But since October, they've been waiting on the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, to find out if they're getting those records that have been subpoenaed. Lower courts say they should. The Supreme Court is just sitting on it. The Supreme Court somewhat inexplicably sitting on this request to deal with that matter for 4 months now. It is an unusual and as yet unexplained delay from the Supreme Court that is having material consequences for what seems like a very live, very active, and newly ambitious investigation, a criminal investigation of the former president in New York. Even as that New York prosecutor's office drafts in new, serious outside firepower to assemble that case against Mr. Trump, the Supreme Court is sitting on the documents that they need for their investigation. Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.